All right, welcome back. This should be the final video in the series for the painted panel project, and this will be your first project, of course. Looking pretty decent. I'm pretty happy with it. The last thing we have to do, even though this one came out pretty clean, we're going to buff it, okay? And the buffing is done to remove any dirt particles that are left in there from painting, and it will get dirt in it from the booth. This isn't a perfectly clean, sterile environment. So we will get some dirt in there, so we want to smooth that out. Also, we're going to take out any texture we don't want, like the orange peel. If it went on dry or something, we can even that out with a little bit of sanding and buffing. The other thing we want to do is kind of minimize the lines from where the tape was. We're not going to get rid of all of it, but it will at least smooth it out quite a bit. So it's, when somebody comes up and touches it, it feels a lot smoother than it is right now. All right, so at this point though, you got to use a lot of care because you've come this far, you've done a lot of work, a lot of prep into this one, and you don't want to ruin it right at the last stage. So we're going to take it easy. We're going to sand it. We're going to sand it with 1500 grit, which is pretty fine. We have to sand it with a fine enough grit so that we can buff it out with a compound. Okay. After that, once we've sanded with 1500, we're going to buff it, and we'll use two different compounds and two different pads, and I'll show you how to do that. All right, so again, it's the same process as we did with the flake, sanding the clear over the flake. We're trying to get the surface smooth to get out any chunks, any lumps and bumps. And one thing you want to watch out for is, again, the edges. All right, we don't want to sand through our edges. And we want to check it frequently so we don't over sand it. Again, you don't want to ruin it at this stage. If you sand through and ruin it, you're either going to have to live with it or you redo it. Okay, so take some care at this stage, and we'll get through this. All right, so I'll bring you in, we'll do a little bit of sanding, and then we'll do some buffing. All right, so first thing we want to do, since it's been sitting around, I want to just wipe it down to get any dust off. Before you sand anything like this, especially at this stage, make sure it's clean, because any grit or dirt that's sitting on the panel, when you're sanding, it's going to dig in and cause deeper scratches. So you don't want to sand in any dirt or grit into your panel at this point. So just some damp paper towels, get the dust off is all you need to do. Okay. All right. So what we're using, make sure you got our bottle of water, our squeegee, the same things that we've used for the sanding the flake. I couldn't find a soft pad. This is just a little hand block, so we'll wrap the sandpaper in this. They come in different shapes and sizes and colors. So the next thing we're going to use is wet or dry paper, and we use this with water. Because it's so fine, it will wear out and clog up pretty quick. All right, so we want to use the water to stretch the sandpaper. Okay, so it's 1500 grit, which is fairly fine, and it leaves a fairly fine scratch, which is easy to buff out. So if you start sanding it with too rough of a grit, let's say we sanded it with 600 or 800 or even 1000, it's going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to get the scratches out of the clear. Okay, so 1500 I found is kind of a nice medium grit that you can just sand it with one grit, and then it buffs out fairly decent. If you're doing a car or something, you might want to work through some grits. You maybe start with 1000, go to 1500, or maybe finish with 2000. You can go all the way up to 3000. I've heard that there's even up to 5000 grit, which is extremely fine. But you have to go through the grits if you're going to go to that fine of a grit. Okay, so this is just kind of a medium grit that we can do it all in one without switching grits. Okay, so 1500 grit. We're going to wrap it, and you can do it without a pad, a soft pad at this point, because it's so fine it doesn't leave too many grooves. I'll start with the pad and see how it comes out. I might switch to just by hand, but same process, right? And I've got it sitting on a board just because it's flexing. You're going to put a little bit of pressure on there. You don't want it to collapse. All right, so same thing, keep the water flowing, start in a section. Watch out for your edges. I would recommend not going quite up to your edges at this point. Save those for last, okay? All right. So we're just letting it dry off here. Wiped it down. We're looking pretty decent. Now, the difference at this point between what we're doing now and then what we were doing with the clear over the flake is with the clear over the flake, we had to make sure there was absolutely no shine because we were putting more layers of paint on top of it. With this, we're not trying to repaint it or anything. We're just trying to buff it. So if there's a little bit of shine around the edges, it's not a big deal. A little bit of shine around the stripes, not a big deal, because we're not trying to get paint to stick to it, right? We're just going to buff it out. So you don't have to go right up to your edges, only if there's a little bit of dirt. See a little bit of dirt right there. So you can kind of hit just the spots that you need, right? Just so you don't burn through on the edges. Okay. Look it over if everything looks good. Again, you're looking at the surface of the panel. You're not looking at the color or anything beneath there. You're looking for it to be smooth, dull, fairly dull, and you'll end up seeing little pieces of dirt, right? Little shiny spots if there's any dirt left in there, okay? And those will be sanded out. So it's looking pretty decent. I think we're ready to start buffing. What I'm going to do is, since I have a board here, I like to screw it down. So I'm going to screw it down to the board here, and we'll start buffing, all right? All right, so we're getting ready to set up here for buffing. I just grabbed a couple of screws, so a couple small screws, the screwdriver gun. I'm just gonna put 2 screws in, and this really helps because these panels go flying pretty easily, especially once you start buffing. If you catch an edge, the panels go flying. So we've had way less problems since we've started screwing them down. Now be careful because you don't want to slip and scratch your panel at this point. All right. All right, now it's secured to the piece of wood there. All right, and we're good to go. So what we're using here is our electric buffer. It's a variable speed on the back, and they're all different, but this is the one we have here at school. It's a variable speed. I think I usually run at about 3 or so, so once we get started, I'll double check that. And these are Velcro. So what we're gonna start with is a wool pad, and this has already been used, so it's got a little bit of compound in there. I'll show you how to clean that. So this is your cutting pad. It's a wool pad. And this is what we use to get the scratches out, okay? And then we're gonna follow it up with a foam pad. And again, this has been used. We'll clean it off real quick, but this is what we use to finalize it, to get the shine up a little bit more and to take out any marks left by this pad, okay? Now with those, we're using 2 different compounds. So this one is 3M. It's got an A on there, so that's your first one. So this is a cutting compound. It's called rubbing compound, but it's for cutting. All right. So we use this first, and we put them into bottles. So the brown one or the beige one goes with the beige pad. Okay. So we know that. The other one we use with the foam pad is number 2. Okay. So this is a finer compound, and these are considered abrasives, right? They're just a real fine abrasive. But this is to remove what's called swirl marks left by this pad, okay? And I'll show you how that works. And again, this one is put in, it's a gray, and this matches that pad. So it's kind of easier to remember that way. The pads coincide with the colors. We put this right here. That's what that is, and that's what that is, all right? So this is what you're gonna need. Also grab an apron. I'm wearing an apron because this stuff slings everywhere. And I also grabbed a screwdriver to use to clean the pads. They do sell a pad cleaner. It's like a spur, like on a cowboy spur on a boot. But what it does is it cleans it and fluffs up the wool. I don't have one of those. A screwdriver works fine. I've been using them for years. You just have to be careful, and I'll show you how to do that, okay? So first thing I want to do, now that we've got it screwed down, is this has Velcro on the back, so I want to stick it on there, and I want to try to center it as close as I can, just by eyeball. I'm just looking at the gap around the pad here, okay? And I want to turn it on and spin it. That looks pretty decent, okay? A lot of times when you put it on, it's going to be off-centered, right? This is going to cause it to shake a lot, and you're going to have a lot of trouble buffing, okay? So get it as centered as possible. You might have to do it a few times. All right, so you want it to run without shaking. All right, so this is ready to go. Let me clear these off. And with the pads, you want to make sure that you never leave them upside down on the bench or on the ground or anything, right? When you set this down, don't set it down like that. Set it down on its back. Otherwise, if you lay it on the ground, it's going to get full of dirt from the ground or whatever you're working on, and it's going to scratch your panel, okay? So keep these as clean as possible. Keep them off the ground. Don't lay them down face down, all right? Always face up, okay? All right, so I want to show you how to clean the pad, okay? First thing to notice is the rotation, which direction it's rotating, all right? That's going to be very important once we start buffing, but when we're cleaning, we also want to know, because we're going to take this screwdriver, all right? So you can see the direction it's spinning. I'm going to rest it on my leg, and I'm going to take the screwdriver, and I'm going to stick it in, and just drag it across. Okay. And what that did is it cleaned up the pad and it fluffed it up a bit, okay, to get rid of all the old compound that's dried in there. So now it's ready to go, all right? Now, be careful when you're doing this. That's why I told you to watch out for the direction. Okay, you want to be, so that if this screwdriver gets stuck, it's going to go down, right? So I've got it on this side, so if something happens, it's going to go to the floor. I never want to do it on this side because it's going to be coming up at me. So if this gets out of hand, this is going to stab you, all right? So I want to make sure that it's on the downside for safety purposes, okay? So on the downside, never on the upside, okay? And that's ready to go. All right. So the panel's screwed down, our pad is clean, we have our compound, we have an apron on, we're ready to start buffing, okay? Now, it was a little slow when I was doing this, so we're gonna put it just above 3. And what you're gonna do is concentrate on one section at a time, okay? I usually say like about a 12-inch by 12-inch section, right? Just concentrate on one. Don't try to buff the whole thing at once. Do it in little sections. It works a lot better, especially like if you're doing a car, like a hood, a huge hood. You're never going to get anywhere by just going everywhere. Focus on one section because your compound is going to get used up, right? It's going to wear out. Your pad is going to dry up. It's also not going to generate enough heat. It needs a little bit of heat, a little bit of friction in there to buff, to get it smooth. So we want to focus on one little section at a time. All right. So what I do, sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit. I'm just going to do a little bit of compound. Okay, so don't overdo it. And especially at the beginning, the pad is dry, so it's going to soak up a little bit of compound. So at the beginning, you're going to use more. And as the pad gets loaded with compound, you'll use less because it already has some on there, okay? Now, the buffing pad, you typically want to tip it a little bit, all right? You don't want to run it too flat, especially with the wool pad. With the foam pad, it'll work, but with this, it wants to jump around a little bit. All right, so tip it a little bit. And again, it's same as grinding. We can tip it different directions. Excuse me. We can tip it different directions to use different sides of the pad, depending on where we're at, okay? So what I want to do, and again, I mentioned watching the rotation, okay? So this is turning clockwise, right? So that, I want to watch out for my edges. So you always want to buff off your edge, not into an edge, okay? So let me just get started. I'll just do a little bit here. I'm going to stay away from my edges for the second. So first thing I want to do is just kind of distribute that compound, okay? That helps it from slinging everywhere. All right, and I'm not going to push down on it. It's just the weight of the buffer, and I want to make sure I've got control of it. And what you want to do is get yourself into a position where you can see the reflection from the overhead lights so that you can kind of gauge your progress. So you don't want to over buff it. Once an area is buffed, and what you're looking for is to get rid of the sand scratches, okay? All you're looking for at this point is getting rid of sand scratches and watching the shine come up, okay? So get yourself into a position where you can see what's going on. Okay. And what I'll usually do is, once I get the compound on there, I'll buff it for a minute, and then as the compound starts drying up and disappearing, I'll do a final pass to kind of clear off the compound so I can check my progress, okay? And again, I'm just looking at the surface, looking for sand scratches, and again, I've stayed away from my edges. I'm mainly just doing the inner portion first, and we'll come up and I'll show you the edges next. So it's looking pretty decent. So I'll move on, and I can always come back to that section if I want to do a little bit more. Again, stay away from your edges, so distribute the compound. So I'm changing areas of the pad depending on where I'm at. So if I'm buffing in this direction, I've got it tipped and I'm using this section of the pad to come up to this edge. And then once I do the inner part here, I'm buffing over here. Do not stay in one spot, right? Don't have the buffer running in one spot. What's going to happen is it'll overheat the paint, and it'll actually soften the paint up enough to smear off, and you'll actually go down to metal just in a second because it'll get too hot. So you always want to keep your buffer moving. Never leave it in one spot because it will overheat. So once you do a section, if you touch it, you'll feel a little bit of heat that's built up. So it does get quite hot if you stay in one spot too long. So you want to make sure you're keeping it moving, okay? So I'll just go over this half. Now as we come up to our edges, this is where the rotation comes into play. So you want to make sure that you understand the rotation of the pad. Okay, so you always want to have the pad cutting off the panel. You never want it going into the edge. Okay, so if I'm doing this edge right here, I've got it tipped, so I'm buffing on this side of the pad, right? So I've got it tipped a little bit, not as extreme as that, but right, so you got it tipped. And what that's doing is it's buffing off the panel. Right? So this side is going into the panel, but we don't want it to touch, right? So we don't want it to go into the edge, we want it to go off, right? Kind of hard to explain. Hopefully by seeing it, you'll understand a little bit, and then once you get into buffing, it'll all make sense. But you never want to have the pad go into the edge. It'll take the paint off. It might send the panel flying. So you want to be careful, okay? So let me do the edges, and when I'm doing the edges, I'm changing the direction, okay? So I can stand in one spot and do all the sides just by changing the angle of the buffer, right? So on this one, I'm doing a little bit of a side, okay? As I come over to here, it would be the bottom down here so that it's going off, and then over on this side, I'd be using the left side so that it's going off, not into, okay? So let me go around the edge a little bit and I'll show you what I'm talking about. I might bring you in closer so you can see. Okay. And as I come over here, I want to switch it. Okay. So I'm using the bottom of it here. Now when I get to that edge, I'm going to switch it again to over here. Okay. And just work your way around the edge. Maybe I'll bring it in closer to see if I can get a better shot. So let me see if this helps a little bit with the angle. Let me put a little bit of compound on there, around our edges. Right, so hopefully, I don't know if you can see it from that angle, but I'm tipping the buffer to the side a little bit. And be careful about buffing when there's no compound on there. If there's no compound and you just need to clean it off, just do a quick little light pass. But don't try to be aggressive and buff too much with no compound, because it will overheat and you will ruin the paint. Okay. Now I'm just going around and looking for sand scratches to get out. Still a little bit along the edges. Again, just look at the surface. And the black will be the easiest one to see. The black will show scratches better than the red will. Okay, so that half is looking pretty decent. Right there. So I'll just finish up the other side here. Nice thing about doing a small panel like this is you can spin it around or walk around it to change your angles, but it's good practice to try to learn how to do from one position all the different sides, right? Because if you have a car that you're buffing, you can't turn the car upside down or whatever, right? Take a panel off. So you want to be able to make sure that you can buff in any position, because in real life that's the way it is, right? You have to kind of make do with what you have. and you can't really spin a car around the way you want it to make it easiest to buff. So practice from one spot, get into all the edges without burning through, okay? To get this edge, I'm going to be using the top of the buffer here because it's going to be spinning in a clockwise fashion off the panel. So I got it tipped, right? So it's just buffing up here. And you'll notice that these buffers are pretty noisy. They got a high pitch whine to them, so you might want to wear earplugs if you're doing a lot of buffing. It gets annoying after a while. Once I think I have everything good, I'm not going to add any more compound. I'm just going to kind of clean it off with a pad and double check it. Now, where the screws are, there's going to be a little bit of an area where it didn't get completely buffed. Not a huge deal. You can always switch it to the opposite corners and do these. But it's just usually just a small spot, so no big deal. Okay. So we want to look it over before we switch pads. So check it over real good, looking for sand scratches. All right, if you see any sand scratches that need to be taken care of, take care of it now. The next pad will not take out sand scratches. So any scratches that are in there, you have to take it out with the wool pad, okay? It's looking pretty decent. You want to make sure though that you don't have a bunch of compound, the beige compound on here, because it's rougher, it's coarser than the gray compound. So you don't want to start buffing with the foam pad with coarse compound, because you'll end up putting more scratches back in there, okay? I see a little spot on the corner I want to hit. Okay. I hesitate to use the paper towels because they do scratch a bit, so I just try to clean it off with the buffer as much as I can. You can kind of get off the remainder with your hand. Looks pretty decent. Okay, so we're going to switch pads. So off with the wool, and we're going to put the foam polishing pad on. Same thing, Velcro. You want to make sure it's fairly centered. Not bad, not bad. Okay. I'm going to clean it the same with the screwdriver, except with the foam, it's just light pressure because you don't want to tear up the foam. Okay. And that just gets any old compound off the surface there. There's some deep stuff, but we're not worried about that. Now with the foam pad, this one you can run it flat. You can lay it flat on here, and it's fine. It doesn't affect it. Doesn't jump around on you. Let's just do half for right now. Same principles apply. Still watch out for your edges. About the only thing is different is you can run it flat. And you want to take your time. Don't rush through this step. A little bit more time spent with this comes out with better results. You'll get a little bit better shine. You won't see swirl marks out in the sun and stuff like that. Okay, so same idea. A little distribution there of the compound. And basically with the foam pad, I buff it until the compound is gone and it's nice and clean, okay? And it's looking really good. Look it over. If you see any little haze or little foggy spots, hit it again, go over it again. It's looking really good, so let's do the other side. Almost got a compound here. I think we'll have enough to finish though. All right, same deal. All right, let's look it over. Look at the reflection. Use the overhead lights. Looks really good. All right, if you're happy with it, the last thing to do is just unscrew it. And be careful, don't scratch your panel at this point. There'll be little smudges of compound here and there. That's all right. Okay, there we have it. One finished panel. Okay, I'll take it outside and see if I can get a shot of it in the sun, see if it shows up outside. But pretty happy with that. Pretty happy. See if I can back out a little bit. Okay. So first panel is finished. We went through a lot of steps, and you can see it is a lot of steps when you break it down. I think we have like 20 videos or something on this one, step by step. So it's a long process, but this is what you end up with in the end. All right. Hopefully it's a quality product. Hopefully you're happy with it. But remember, this is probably your first one, maybe your first time ever painting, right? So if it doesn't come out perfect, don't be too hard on yourself, all right? It takes years and years and years to perfect this craft, okay? So don't give up, don't get discouraged if the first one doesn't come out the way you wanted it to. If you apply yourself and really take it seriously, you'll get better each time. So you'll learn any mistakes you learned off of this one and apply it to the next project you do, okay? So you should constantly be learning and improving and changing to make things better, right? So learn from your mistakes and apply it to the next project, all right? So I'll see if I can get an outside shot of it finished in the sun. And other than that, we are finished with this project. So hopefully you enjoyed it. I know it was long. Some of the videos are long, but again, I want to show the process. I want to show what's involved. I don't want to sugarcoat it. It is a lot of work, all right? And hopefully in the end, you have a quality product that you're happy with, all right? So until the next project, I'll see you. So hopefully you can see it out in the sun here. Try to move it around a little bit. See if it picks it up on camera. Looks really good. As you move it through there, you'll see the sparkles, see all the designs. Really happy with it. Looks pretty cool. All right, another project finished.